Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and we are in round 10 of our coverage of the 2021 Canada's Tournament. It's a race to see who will face Magnus Carlsen for the World Championship later this year. I thought we'd do a video on the leader of the tournament so far, and that is Jan Nepomniachtchi. He is my dark horse. If you remember from a year ago in round 1, I said I thought he would win the tournament. He had a really good game against Nxd4, and he's been leading the entire way. I also think he has a really good shot at beating Magnus Carlsen. His opponent, playing the black pieces, Kirill Alekseenko, and he is middle of the pack, but definitely with a victory could leapfrog a lot of the players and see himself near the top of the sitting. So an important game for both of these players, but we will go ahead and get started with Jan playing the white pieces with pawn to c4. Now black plays knight to f6, and I almost always just expect that it's going to be pawn to d4. They play this pawn to c4, teasing me that they're going to play the English opening, but they never actually do. But Jan said, yeah, I actually am going to play the English opening. So pawn to g3, preparing to fianchetto the bishop here to g2. So pawn to e6, bishop here to g2. Saw a similar type game yesterday in the Catalan opening when the bishop comes here to g2, trying to control this light square diagonal here. That's exactly what Jan's going to be looking to do in the English opening as well. Pawn to d5, knight here to f3, says, yeah, I don't mind if you take this pawn, that's fine. So after the pawn takes, queen up here to a4, check, and then preparing to capture this pawn right here. That's exactly what we see. And then pawn to a6, preparing to push forward with pawn to b5. And this would kick back the queen and also prepare for the bishop to come here to b7 and really counterattack these light squares, this diagonal that white's really looking to control in the game. So the queen comes back here to c2, recognizing that the pawn is going to be coming down. First, we see pawn to c5, just trying to control the center of the board. Since white's going to be attacking the light squares, black wants to go ahead and start attacking with the dark squares here. Knight to c3, just simple development move, bishop here to e7, prepare to castle on the king side. We see castle from both sides, and then pawn up here to d4. What I really like about this is because after the exchange here, the knight takes here on d4 and taking material while also opening up for this light square bishop to control this long square diagonal, this long light square diagonal is really, really powerful for whites, because if you look from black's standpoint, really wants to get this light square bishop involved into the game, but now really can't play the pawn anywhere because then the rook's going to fall here. This knight here on d7 is kind of awkwardly placed. It can't come to a great outpost. Like c5 is not really a great outpost. Knight to e5, not protected by any pawn, so it can easily be pushed away. And then if you look at how does this light square bishop get involved into the game, no real clear path unless you want to use up one of your moves to maybe play rook to b8 and then start pushing forward with your pawn. So really good. It's a subtle move just to play up here to d4 and exchange with that pawn here from c5. But I thought that ended up extremely well for Jan. Now queen to c7. And we see rook over here to d1, just activating that, getting it to the center of the board. This is a open file, so definitely trying to get the rooks over here to the c file and the d file to really control those long files. Rook over here to d8 from a black as well, thinking the same thing, and then bishop here to e3. You can always push if you want to, but it does get kind of awkward. This is your only central pawn that you have left. And then if they, let's say, knight to c5, all of a sudden both of their knights are attacking this pawn right here. And you aren't really going to have any other protection for this pawn except your minor pieces. You're not going to be pushing forward with, let's say, f3, because you really need, especially when you fianchetto to the king side of the board, you usually like to keep this structure. And so pawn to e4 just doesn't make as much sense as you would normally see in a chess opening. So instead, bishop here to e3. And then knight here to b6, followed by rook to c1. Just getting both of these rooks in the center of the board, controlling these open files. Now black decides to go ahead and attack the knight here in the center of the board. So pawn here to e5. But as we talked about, similar to white here, this pawn on e5 is going to be difficult for black to hold on to from a protection standpoint. This knight here on f6 is blocking the pawn, so this pawn's not going to be pushing forward. Does not have his d pawn here, so that's not going to be able to protect it. So yes, this is definitely forcing the knight to move, but definitely something that white can attack later in the game. So knight to f5. And then after the bishop takes, queen takes here, then knight to c4. This is attacking both the bishop here on e3 and the pawn to b2. Bishop comes up here to g5, attacking the knight. Now, if you look at it, say, well, yeah, I was attacking the bishop, so maybe he doesn't want to give up his bishop pair, which is a huge advantage for white here. But it also leaves this pawn here on b2. But black really can't take that. And so you always have to really think about what happens if material takes. And so after the knight takes here on b2, what we would see is knight to d5. You can see lots of stuff is happening right here. This is attacking the queen, both with the knight and the rook here on c1, but it's also putting a lot of pressure on this f6 square. Now, probably the best move is just to go ahead and take this material, knowing that you eventually are going to lose a lot of material, but after the rook takes here, you can see all of a sudden we have the two rooks here for white. Black had to give up a rook. Attacking the queen still from this rook here on c1. So after the queen moves, you can see an exchange right here. But then rook to c8 forces the other rook to come off the board, and things get pretty difficult for black here. You can see the light square bishop can now get involved into the game, and there's just too much pressure on black to really do anything. White should have a pretty easy game. So if we come back, the knight is not going to be taking that pawn here on b2. That would be a big mistake. So instead we see the rook coming down, taking here on d1. We see the knight come back to d1, also protecting this pawn here on b2. So you always want to be thinking about how you can take material or get out of the way while also posing a threat or defending one of your pieces as well. That's exactly what knight to d1 does. Even though normally you don't want to bring your material back, this knight coming back to d1 definitely protects this. Also opens up for the rook to really control this c file, so the knight can't move here because then the queen would fall. It just puts a lot of pressure on black. Now the rook comes over here to d8. Don't know that this is really the best move. Maybe queen to d8. Getting it off this c file I think makes a lot of sense here, because yes, if they just take the knight here, that's fine. The queen could just come down and take the knight here on d1. So I always like finding the threats that your opponent has and trying to minimize what they can do. So I would have probably played queen here to d8. But black decided to go ahead and play rook to d8. Bishop takes here on f6. There is an exchange right here. And then bishop here to e4. And you can see the threat. It's queen to h7. This is check. Now, not checkmate. If the rook was over here on f8, that would be checkmate. The king can still come over here, but it loses a pawn of material, and you're just going to be chasing the king around the board. Black decides, okay, we're not going to worry about that right away. I'm going to play queen to a5. If you want to take my pawn over here, I'm going to go ahead and take your pawn here on a2. And so white says, okay, if you want to do that, I don't want to lose my pawn, so I'm just going to bring my knight up here to c3. This also gets it out of harm's way from the rook if it ever wants to come down here as well. Also, you can see the threat from black is also just playing queen to e1 check. So not only attacking this pawn right here. So this move on knight to c3 does a lot of stuff for white here, including protecting this pawn. And white still has that threat here on h7. So king comes to f8. Yes, you are going to lose material at some point, but you are getting your king out of harm's way as quick as possible. White says, yeah, I don't just want a pawn. I want the entire game. So I'm just going to get more material involved into the attack. So knight to d5 here. Always good to centralize your attackers. And you can see it's got a nice little outpost from this light square bishop. The dark square bishop can't attack this d5 square. And this knight here on c4, it's not really doing anything right now as far as attacking it either. Now, it could come back if it wants to, but decides to go ahead and push forward here with b5. Then queen takes here on h7. We knew it was coming at some point. Rook decides to go ahead and take here on d5. And if you look at it and say, why would you give up a rook for a knight here? Well, not all is lost, because after the rook takes and the bishop takes, then queen down to d2. Definitely going to get material back here, because you can see the queen's attacking the rook here on c1 as well as the bishop here on d5. So no way to hold on to the material. So just decides to go ahead and take material here on c4, blow up this pawn chain a little bit. Anytime you are looking for an exchange, see how you can make your opponent end up with a worse position. And so now there's two isolated pawns here. So going into the end game, white definitely has better pawn structures as the pawns are connected more so than black. Both sides do have a bishop, but they are different color bishops. So I have another video if you ever wanted to watch and see how that in-game compares to some other in-games, specifically if they were on the same colors. Light square or dark squares definitely plays different. So pawn to e4. So this is a great outpost for this bishop here on a d5. Really blocks off where this queen can go to and how it can maneuver around the board. Queen takes here on b2. Queen up here to h8 check. King here to e7, and then queen over here to c8, attacking this pawn right here, attacking this pawn here on a6, and preparing for a threat on this king here exposed in the center of the board. Now, understanding the threat, black comes back here to b6. Queen takes here on c4, and this is preparing for the bishop to come up. Take here on f7 with more threats coming after that. Queen to b5 says, I'm not looking to exchange at all. Jan definitely thinks he has the upper hand. Queen here to c7. Queen up here to d7, and then queen to c5 check. And in this position, black decided to resign. I think it's a little premature to resign. Now, do I think Jan's going to win? Absolutely. Does he have the upper hand? Absolutely. Would it be difficult to defend this? Absolutely. Should he resign in this position? I don't think so, because it's not the easiest, and I don't think you have anything to lose to play this out, and maybe you could get a draw out of it. And so sometimes people say, how would this even end in a win for white here? Okay, well, we have check. One variation could be king comes back here to d8. King here to g2, just getting out of harm's way if queen ever comes down to the first rank here. Maybe bishop to e7, attacking the queen. Queen to b6 check. Queen over here c7, gobbling up material. Now there's a passed pawn. Makes it a little bit easier. King to e8 and then a4, and it's tough to push or to stop this push here on the a file. I don't know exactly how it would go, but black decided did not want to play anymore. So congratulations to Jan. He still leads the tournament now by a full point with 4 rounds to go. It definitely looks like he is in the driver's seat, and he's playing some phenomenal chess. So curious to see if he can continue. While I do have some others that I am cheering for in the tournament, I really want to see a good matchup against Magnus Carlsen. And out of all the players, I really think that Jan has the best chance to beat him. And if that gives us the best world championship later in the year, I'm definitely going to be a fan of that, just being a chess fan. So thank you guys so much for watching round 10, and I will see you guys next time for round 11.